Well, as you know, Barack Obama comes to town today, but someone just as important in terms of where we are is already in town, Dr. Bjorn Lomborg. He is an adjunct professor at the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark. This is a man who once held what he described as left-wing Greenpeace views. And having set out to debunk the claims of the American economist Julian Simon, who expressed doubt about what we were being told about the environment, Dr. Lomborg told me at the time that he set out to do a lot of work, and in the end he found himself agreeing with Julian Simon. In fact, he wrote in 2001 that environmentalists had developed a sort of litany about the big four environmental fears at the time. Natural resources were running out, they said. The ever-growing world population is leaving us with less and less to eat. Species are becoming extinct in vast numbers. Forests are disappearing. Fish stocks are collapsing. And the Earth's air and water are becoming more and more polluted. All of those things he found were the province of those who look on the dark side of life. He told me in an interview at the time that scientific funding goes mainly to areas with many problems. And while this may be wise policy, he said, it creates the impression that more problems exist than actually do. He made the point that environmental groups need to be noticed by the media, and they need to keep the money rolling in. Hence they make the doomsday claims. Well, where are we today? How appropriate that Dr. Lomborg is here when we're in this whole business of pricing carbon. When Paul Kelly wrote last week, here we are in contrast with the rest of the world, and that contrast is jaw-dropping. Europe, the home of climate change activism once, is sinking into an institutional, financial and political crisis. There's not a remote thought of a carbon dioxide tax the like of which we've got. There's no prospect of any scheme passing the United States Congress for years, if ever. So the world's moving in one direction, we're moving in another. And our carbon price is close to double the carbon price in major international markets. Our industry's set to be at a major disadvantage. But the Greens Deputy Leader Christine Milne said of the carbon tax, or carbon dioxide tax, this is a power-sharing parliament. And as a result of an agreement with the government, there was an undertaking to deliver a carbon price mechanism in this period of government. Julia Gillard backed this for political survival, to stay in the lodge. Martin Ferguson had a dose of reality last week when he took a calculated aim at the Greens, and when the Greens declared that the policy must go further, and they advocated a 100% renewable energy future that would terminate the age of coal and gas. Ferguson accused them of living in fantasy land. Well, Dr. Bjorn Lomborg is here, a man of immense influence. He's an adjunct professor, as I said, at the Copenhagen Business School. He's the organiser of the Copenhagen Consensus Centre, which brings together some of the world's top economists, including 5 Nobel laureates, to set priorities for the world. Time magazine named Bjorn Lomborg as one of the world's 100 most influential people in 2004. In 2008, he was named one of the 50 people who could save the planet by the UK Guardian newspaper. Foreign Policy and Prospect magazine called him one of the top 100 public intellectuals. And according to Esquire magazine, he's one of the world's 75 most influential people of the 21st century. This year he wrote an article headed, "A Carbon Tax Can't Save the Planet." I have to say that Bjorn Lomborg was formally used by the Danish government as a magnificent ambassador for them. That government has changed, and their funding of his role and centre has changed. Dr. Lomborg's travelling the world looking for possible financial supporters. I recommend him to business. Get off your backside. This man we need. He's on the line. Bjorn Lomborg, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Alan.
Thank you so much for your time. You said that introducing a carbon price may feel like a symbolic victory, but unfortunately symbolism will not reduce temperature rises.
Exactly, and the whole point here is to recognize that while there is an academic argument for a low-carbon tax, the idea of selling this as the solution to climate change is simply ludicrous. As you mentioned, first of all, it's not going to happen in most of the world. But even if it did, even if we managed to get a carbon tax across the entire world, it would probably cut about 10% of our usage at the correct price, about $7 per ton, which is, of course, a lot less than what even Australia is just implementing. It would not cut emissions dramatically. And in some way, we're simply barking up the wrong tree. And achieving a huge amount of political fallout. We have an incredible polarization here in Australia on the issue, but of course also in the U.S. and elsewhere. And as you also mentioned, it's very clear if you look to Europe, it's not that we are the solution to look to. What you need is not getting to have fossil fuels become more expensive. That's both politically hard to do, and it doesn't solve the problem. What you need to do is to innovate green energy so that eventually green energy will become so cheap that everyone will want to buy it.
Yeah, I was interested in your point that economic models, climate economic models, show that to achieve the goal, which everyone talks about, of keeping temperature increases under 2 degrees centigrade, you need a global tax on carbon dioxide emissions that would start at nearly $100 a tonne and increase to more than $3,700 a tonne by the end of the century, which would cost the world $40 trillion a year. I mean, we're in la-la land.
Absolutely. And one of the points here is to recognize this is the average of all the most optimistic macroeconomic models that say this can be done. So it's not something that is made up. This is the exact same models that the UN is using to estimate what is going to be the cost. So we've got to realize we're never going to go down this route. Even if Australia is, we're not going to see most countries doing this. And even if everyone was,
what about poor old Australia? Bjorn, poor old Australia. Can you send us a sympathy card? What?
Well, I think what we should do is to recognize that there's a lot of people who want to do good, and that's great. What we need then is to pull them away from the cliff, if you will, and say, let's not do something that just makes us feel good, like a carbon tax.
But see, you've made the very valid point. You've said that non-carbon-based alternative energy sources are not ready to take over from fossil fuels.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing in Europe and elsewhere. We're essentially having to dramatically subsidize inefficient green energy sources, which is why, the Germans, they're the biggest users of solar power in the world per capita, which if
Just say that again. Significantly subsidize inefficient energy sources, eh?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, wind and solar provide less than 0.6% of the world's entire energy needs.
Yeah, and that's why we need to recognize we're not going to be able to push this by just pushing more money into this hole. What we can do is to dramatically innovate prices down eventually. Because imagine if we could make solar or wind or some of the other green energy technologies over the next 2 to 4 decades cheaper than fossil fuels. We would have solved global warming. Everyone would switch, not because they were forced to or because they were green, but simply because our innovations have made them cheaper. So it's great. It's a great economic idea to increase innovation into green energy. And that's why Australia could be a leader, but you should not be so through a carbon tax. You should be so by a much cheaper and much more efficient way of pushing green innovation.
So start all over again is what you're saying. I mean, I noted your point that China's solar and wind generation, if they were maintained across the entire century, would lower temperatures in 2100 by 0.401 degrees centigrade.
Yeah, it would have absolutely no impact. What we need to recognize again is there's a lot of people who go out and see, these vast tracts of solar panels or windmills and say, wow, China is really on its way. But what you have to recognize is, no, China is really on its way to dramatically increase its carbon emissions because they use massive amounts of fossil fuels.
They're using our coal to increase the emissions. They're using our coal.
Of course. And listen, what you have to come to terms with is, as long as fossil fuels are the cheapest source of energy, you can have a few virtuous countries that are saying, well, we will change that impact a tiny bit, as Australia tries to do now, and as Europe tries to do. They'll feel virtuous, but presumably this was about cutting carbon emissions in the long run to make sure we actually did something about the problem.
What cost to our economy? I mean, you made the point that wind and solar supply less than 0.6% of the world's entire energy needs, and you say they're not only much more expensive than fossil fuels, but there are huge technological hurdles to overcome to make them efficient.
And that's, of course, the other point. Even if they are competitive at one point. What you have to remember is it doesn't always blow, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine when you need the energy.
No.
And what do you do then? We have to realize if we're going to dramatically move towards a green energy source, you cannot do that without also having storage solved. And so again, this comes down to the point of realizing right now we do not have the technology, we do not have the economics to do this. Are we going to just try and tax fossil fuels to not have people use it?
But you're not just taxing fossil fuels, you're taxing the economy, you're taxing business, you're taxing jobs, you're taxing it. I mean, you've said putting a high price on carbon or carbon dioxide and hoping that alternative technology will catch up is not good policy.
It's not going to happen. We're not going to get sufficiently high carbon costs that we actually dramatically drive innovation. And if we did, we would shut down our economy. So we got to realize we're not on the right track. And I think one of the ironic points is recognize over the last 20 years, we have been told the same solution. Since 1992 in Rio, we've been told, let's cut our carbon emissions, and that's the way forward. Well, first of all, we've not had much success with China or India, the other countries. And even in Europe, where we've been trying the most, we have cut very little. And notice what we've done instead. We've shifted most of our production to China.
That's right.
So we've really just been engaged in this play where we all feel virtuous, where we incur a cost, but don't actually solve it.
Oh, but look what it's going to cost us. You've said until alternative energy technology is ready to compete on its merits, carbon taxes will simply bleed the economy while providing no real benefit to the climate.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate point. If you want to do good, focus on the much cheaper and much more efficient policy of dramatically increasing innovation in green energy. Don't try to cut carbon emissions now when it's costly. Make sure you cut it in the future where everyone, including China and India...
Well, Bjorn, just take green energy. Just take green energy. We've got a country here where the Greens and the Labor Party don't want to build dams. So put a cross through hydroelectricity for a start. They don't want nuclear energy. That we'll export our uranium to every country around the world, but we won't have a nuclear energy industry here. So put a line through that. I mean, solar and wind power then are too costly compared to coal-fired power. All we've got left is coal and gas, and this massive tax that's coming in next July. I mean, Australia's being led down a dead end, aren't we?
You're certainly being led down an end where you only feel virtuous, where you only have a situation where you say, we're going to pay a lot of money, but feel like we're contributing to tackling the climate change problem. But of course you're not. You're not setting up an example in which China or India or other countries are going to say, wow, we would like to go down the same route. Of course you're not just going to tax your industry, bleed your economy, and actually have no impact on climate. What you could do, and what Australia should be doing, is to say we are going to be spending 0.2% of our GDP on research and development into green energy research. That would be about $2 billion a year. It would be much cheaper than the current policy. And ultimately, that approach, delivered throughout the world, would help solve global warming, but at a much lower cost and much more effectively.
Good on you. Well, now, look, I'm going to stop you there because Bjorn Lomborg is the organiser of the Copenhagen Consensus Centre. His government has cut funding to that centre. There's a man whom we need. He's travelling the world talking sense, looking for financial support as business, Australian business. You're in a hole. Get off your backside. This is the man you should be supporting. We'll keep in touch, Dr. Lomborg. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. There we are. That's the man who should be the ambassador for common sense.